Rome. By the year 180 of the current era, it had become the greatest empire ever known. The most powerful and advanced civilization in the world. At its peak, the empire created by Rome reached 3.5 million square kilometers and about 70 million inhabitants. They had the largest and most powerful army. Rome, along with Greece, was the cultural mother of modern Western nations. His colossal building projects spanned 3 continents and became symbols of the empire. They unleashed the power and promise of the world's most advanced civilization. Many of the empires that followed Rome modeled themselves after its image and likeness. Join us to explore the complete history of Rome and the Roman Empire, from its origin through its heyday and its subsequent fall, during this and the next episodes of our Origin series.
Before we dive into this story, don't forget that we have a playlist on our channel where we explore the history of our world and all the episodes of our Origin series in chronological order. Also, don't forget to subscribe, and if you like the content, please share it and leave us a like so that our work can help many more people.
Year 180 of our era. Rome had become the greatest empire ever known. It had unified Italy and conquered all the territories that surrounded the Mediterranean Sea, forming the last and best organized empire of antiquity. In the process, it had managed to spread throughout its provinces the Latin culture, mixed with the Greek and Hellenistic, and created the basis of the future Western civilization. But almost 1,000 years before, no one could imagine that a humble city-state, perhaps despicable, would be the cradle of one of the most important empires in history. The first traces of settlements were found in the area at the Valchetta site, dating back to prehistory, 65,000 years ago. Then, already in the Iron Age, Indo-European peoples arrived in the territory. Legend has it that, in 753 before our era, in Lazio, on the banks of the Tiber River, 2 twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, descendants of the Trojan Aeneas, and sons of the god Mars and Princess Rhea Silvia, were the founders of Rome. Aeneas, Prince of Dardania, would have escaped the destruction of Troy around 1184 before the current era. 3 decades later, his son Ascanio founded the city of Alba Longa, of which he was its first king. From Ascanio, a dynasty of kings arose, of which the best known were Procas and his sons, Emilio and Numitor. For centuries later, the time of King Numitor would come. Numitor was deposed by his brother Emilio, who killed all his sons and turned his only daughter, Rhea Silvia, into a Vestal virgin. But according to legend, the god of war, Mars, fell in love with the beautiful girl and seduced her. From their union, 2 twins were engendered, Romulus and Remus. Emilio, fearful of having 2 possible rivals in the future, ordered their assassination. But the man in charge of the infanticide did not manage to commit it. And to save them, they were left in the waters of the Tiber, inside a basket. The current carried the basket in which they were sheltered to a swamp located between the Palatine and Capitol Hills. There, they were cared for and fed by a she-wolf named Luperca. Later, they were discovered by a shepherd and raised by him. As adults, Romulus and Remus discover their true origins, eventually killing their uncle and restoring their grandfather to the throne. Later, they would found their own city. However, they had to agree on who would be its king. Romulus won the debate by killing Remus, and as legend has it, on April 21, 753 before the current era, he built his city on Palatine Hill, and as its first king, named it after him, Roma Romulus. By the middle of the 8th century before our era, the Phoenicians had already founded Carthage in North Africa. New colonies had been established in Sicily and Spain. Egypt was plunged into a deep crisis and fragmentation since the fall of the new empire. The Greeks began to expand their territory around the Mediterranean. In Mesopotamia, the Assyrian Empire grew stronger and began to advance on Israel, the Phoenician, Judean, and Syrian cities. And in the Italian peninsula, at this time, Etruria was becoming one of the great powers of the Mediterranean, along with the Greeks and the Phoenicians. Etruria was, and still is, one of the most fertile regions of Italy, so it is not surprising that the Etruscans soon turned to trade. There were great contacts and cultural exchanges. They sailed along the coasts of Italy and founded colonies on the island of Sardinia. Meanwhile, Rome was populating itself with refugees and fugitives from neighboring cities and even more distant lands. Rome offered immigrants a unique opportunity to become full citizens. Romulo decided to organize the population, created a single politic body, laws were enacted, and common customs were created. Also, at that time, the first 100 paeters were elected, who were appointed senators by the king, and whose descendants would be the patricians. All of this makes for a fascinating story. But how much of it is true is unclear. The reality is that everything that happened in the years before the rise of the Republic is lost in myth and legend. No contemporary written history has survived from this period. Although much of this history has been lost, the Roman historian, Titus Livius, was able to write a remarkable history of Rome, 142 volumes, in which he recounts the years of the monarchy until the fall of the Republic. Historical writing in Rome did not begin until the late 3rd century before the current era, when Rome had already completed its conquest of Italy, established itself as one of the major powers of the ancient world, and engaged in a gigantic struggle with Carthage for the control of the Western Mediterranean. Archaeological remains confirm that the first form of political organization was monarchical. What is clear is that Rome was a meeting point for the various communication routes that converged there. Rome had luck with its neighbors to the north, the Etruscans of modern Tuscany. Mysterious people whose language has never been fully deciphered. Much of what later made the Romans famous, the famous aqueducts, bridges, even the gladiatorial games, were borrowed from the Etruscans. The Etruscans had invented the Latin alphabet, adapting the Greek letters for their own needs. Not surprisingly, the last Roman kings were Etruscans. Rome took from them its military and governmental organization, maintaining at the same time a strict patriarchal simplicity. To the south, Rome had the Greek colonies. These towns all traded with each other. In 707 before the current era, Sparta founded Taranto, which became the most important Greek city in Italy. It was at the crossroads of its trade routes, linking north with south, that Rome flourished. Later, the Latin nuclei that inhabited the Quirinal Hills, those of Esquiline and Celio, merged with those of the Palatine. After fortifying the inhabited area, the first phase of ancient Rome began in this way. Around the 8th century before our era, the Roma Quadrata. From this time dates the creation of the 4 regions, in which the city was divided in historical times. Thanks to the work of classical authors, such as Titus Livius, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, Virgil, Plutarch, and others, everything we know about Rome has reached the present day. There is coincidence between the stories of all of them in that, in the first centuries of the life of Rome, there was a succession of 7 kings. For 250 years, these 7 kings had an average of 35 years per reign, from the year of the founding of Rome in 753, with Romulus as its first king, until the birth of the Republic in 509 before our era, after the overthrow of Lucius Tarquinius Superb. Romulus would have reigned from 753 to 716. Numa Pompilius would follow, Tullus Hostilius, Enco Marcio, Tarquinius Priscus, Servius Tullius, and the 7th and last king of this succession, Tarquinius Superb. Tarquinius Superb used violence, murder and terror to maintain control over Rome, as no previous king had used them. The turning point of his tyrannical reign came when he allowed the rape of Lucretia, a Roman patrician, by her own son Sextus. The Senate then decided to expel Tarquinius Superb in 503. This meant the end of Etruscan influence, both in Rome and in Lazio, and the establishment of a republican constitution. After Tarquinius Superb, who had reigned 25 years, was expelled, the Senate decided to abolish the monarchy, turning Rome into a republic in the year 509. In all cases, the kings who ruled during the monarchical period of Rome were elected by the people to rule for life. With the exception of Romulus, for having been the founder of the city. Roman royalty was almost absolute. A king was chosen by the Senate, but once in office, he was the highest authority in Rome. He generated laws, controlled the armed forces, was the supreme judge, and was even the only diviner, since he had the right of auspicium, the ability to interpret the designs of the gods. On the other hand, laws that safeguarded citizens from abuses committed by magistrates did not yet exist during the monarchical stage. The king had the power to select all the magistrates and judges, as well as the patricians, to act as senators. The Senate only fulfilled the role of advisor. The only thing the king needed consent for was to declare war. Roman kings also held office until death. Due to the king's power, Rome was able to make quick decisions in times of war. However, it also meant that there was no way to reduce the power of a king, short of assassinating him. Once the king died, the Senate could appoint for a short period an interrex. When the interrex appointed a candidate, he presented the candidate to the Senate. If the Senate approved his candidacy, the interregnum assembled the assembly curiate and served as its president during the election of the king. There, the people decided whether to accept the candidate. If it was accepted, the elected king could still not assume the throne. It had to previously go through 2 other processes. In the first place, the augur summoned the gods through the auspices, and then announced if the gods had shown favorable signs, which confirmed the sacred character of the king. The second step was the granting of the empire to the new king. The same king proposed to the curiate assembly a law by which he obtained the imperium, which through the favorable vote of the assembly was granted to the monarch. the first king of Rome, was its mythical founder, Romulus. Romulus reigned from 753 to 716. He invited refugees from nearby lands to populate the city. The population of Rome was divided by Romulus between strong men and those who were not fit to fight. The first formed the first Roman legions, while the rest of the population would become part of the plebs. Of all of them, Romulus selected 100 of the men of the highest lineage as senators, to whom another 100 would be added later after the union with the Sabines. These men were called paeters, and their descendants would be the patricians. Romulus divided the people of Rome into 3 tribes: Romans, Sabines, and the rest were Luces. Each tribe elected 10 curiae, who represented the citizens, and contributed 100 knights and 10 centuries of infantry, thus forming the first legion of 300 horsemen and 3,000 infantrymen. They also instituted the first priests, the augurs. Given the lack of women in the city, which would have generated a great long-term problem, he organized a banquet to kidnap those from the neighboring tribe, the Sabine women. This led to wars that could have destroyed Rome if the women themselves had not intervened. After avoiding the war through the mediation of these women, both towns were united, and Romulus shared the rest of his reign with Titus Tatius, the chief of the Sabines, who would thus be an 8th king, not included in the list. After 37 years of reign, Romulus had fought numerous wars, spreading Rome's influence throughout Latium and other surrounding areas. Soon, he would be remembered as the first great conqueror. After his death at the age of 54, he was deified as the god of war, Quirinus. After the death of Romulus, the reign of the city fell to the Sabine Numa Pompilius. Already advanced in years, he was the son-in-law of Titus Tatius and the first of the Sabine kings of Rome. The information we have to learn about the life and reign of Numa Pompilius comes mainly from the Greek historian Plutarch. His reign would have spanned from the year 716 to the year 673 before our era. He enjoyed a long life, in which he exceeded 80 years of age. He issued laws and promoted the rights and peace agreements between Rome and the rest of the cities. Under his reign, the oldest temples in Rome, those of Vesta and Janus, were created. This was a king remembered above all for his devotion to the gods. He created the priestly colleges, he instituted the office of pontiff, which was the highest degree of the priesthood, and its members were chosen from among the senators. More than any other king, Numa Pompilius seems to have embodied the ideals of justice, virtue, and piety. He is remembered as a peaceful king and for his wisdom. Numa reformed the Roman calendar, adjusting it for the solar and lunar year, also adding the months of January and February to complete the 12 months of the new calendar. His contribution to the history of Rome was very important, since he would have created institutions that would extend beyond the monarchical stage, reaching the Republican and Empire periods. He organized the surrounding territory of Rome into districts for a better administration and distributed the lands conquered by Romulus among the citizens. As a kind and peace-loving man, Numa planted ideas of piety and justice in the Roman mind. He did not wage any war throughout his tenure. After 43 years of reign, Numa's death occurred peacefully and naturally. Who assumed the throne after the death of Numa Pompilius was the third king of Rome, Tullus Hostilius. His reign would have spanned from the year 673 to the year 641 before our era. Son of Ursilia, who became the wife of Romulus and Hostio Hostilius. He was Latin and an elderly man when he came to power. Tullus Hostilius was very similar to Romulus in terms of his warrior character, and completely opposite to Numa, due to his lack of attention towards the gods. Tullus fomented several wars against Alba Longa, Fidenas, and Veii. so that Rome thus obtained new territories and greater power. It was during the reign of Tullus, when Alba Longa was completely destroyed, its entire population being enslaved and sent to Rome. Alba Longa was, according to legend, the ancient city founded by Ascanius, son of Aeneas. From this city came the ancestors of Romulus and his own mother, Rhea Silvia. It was located in ancient Lazio, at the foot of Mount Albo and next to the Albula River. King Tullus' people and their neighbors in Alba Longa had lived together for about 100 years, from the time Rome had been founded by the first king, Romulus, in 753. Now, the neighboring cities were at odds, each side accusing the other of plundering the land across their borders. After the plundering of Alba Longa land by Roman peasants, a series of retaliatory raids by Albanians followed. Tullus Hostilius sought war against the city of Alba Longa. Both kings sent legates to claim the return of what was stolen, but Tullus Hostilius anticipated to reject those of Alba Longa, declaring war. Alba Longa's army marched against Rome. Legendary Roman hero, Horus, led his troops against Alba's forces. The king of Alba Longa, Gaius Lucilius, died on the battlefield. So Maecius Fuficio was appointed dictator. Maecius realized that continuing the battle between the two cities would weaken them, and they could easily be subdued later in an attack by the Etruscans. Horus was wounded and taken prisoner, but escaped and took refuge in the hills. Both rulers then agreed to decide which city would have authority over the other, no longer through a battle between the two armies, but through combat between representatives of each army. 3 Roman triplet brothers against 3 Albanian triplet brothers. The king of Rome, believing that Horus had been a coward, announces the engagement of his daughter Marcia to Horus's brother, Marco, whom he names as his heir. Finally, on the day of the combat between the triplets on both sides, Horus returned to fight alongside his 2 brothers. After an intense fight, his 2 brothers were killed. But Horus continued the fight alone and killed the 3 Albanian brothers, including Curiazio. Curiazio was the lover of Horus's sister. Horus's sister then, seeing her husband dead, stabbed herself to death. Finally, the victory had been for the Romans, and as a consequence, the Albanians submitted to Rome. In this way, Rome imposed itself on its mother city as the hegemonic power of Latium. Tullus Hostilius then set out to attack the Etruscan city of Veii. In turn, the city of Fidene, which was subject to Rome as a colony, planned to rebel with the support of Veii. Tullus Hostilius called in the Albanians for support. Maecius Fuficio, the dictator of Alba Longa, betrayed the Romans at the time of the battle, driving the Albanians away from the battlefield. But Rome, in any case, managed to defeat the Fidenites. Then, they attacked Veii's wing and defeated it. The The battle was the bloodiest that Rome had fought up to that point. Tullus Hostilius accused the Albanian chief of treason and had him dismembered by tying him to 2 chariots. He then arranged for Rome and Alba Longa to reunite as one town and city, bringing the Albanians to Rome, giving Roman citizenship to their people and senatorial office to their leaders. Alba Longa was destroyed in its urban structure, and its inhabitants relocated to Rome. Tullus Hostilius wanted new wars, so much that he even fomented another conflict against the Sabines, so that it can be said that it was during his reign when the Roman people acquired the desire for new conquests at the cost of peace. Tullus, among other works carried out in the city, also erected a new building to house the Senate, the Curia, which existed for 5 centuries. Concerned about the power that the king was accumulating, Anco Marcius, the son of Numa Pompilius, together with a group of Romans, in 641 before our era, would enter the palace of Tullus Hostilius, assassinating the king and his family, and burning the place down. After the death of the king, whose reign came to an end after 32 years, Anco Marcius would succeed him on the throne. After the death of Tullus, the Romans chose the Sabine Anco Marcius. He was the 4th of the kings of Rome and the last of the Latin dynasty. He would rule Rome from 641 to 617 before our era. To situate ourselves in time, at the time Anco Marcius took the throne in Rome, the Assyrian Empire, the most powerful in the world at the time, was going through a stage of weakness after reaching its peak after the conquest of Egypt in 671. The weakening of Assyria favored the prosperity of Phoenicia. Although the Greeks were taking over the eastern Mediterranean, the Phoenicians ventured west. They created bases in what is now Algeria, occupied the Balearic Islands, and extended their occupation of the Spanish coast. Lydia, in the territory of today's Turkey, reached its peak under the reign of the Mernada dynasty. In the Kingdom of Lydia, the first coins in history began to be issued. The emergence of these first coins completely revolutionized trade and the economy, significantly boosting trade in the Mediterranean. In ancient Greece, the Archaic period passed. Sparta imposed its authority over the Peloponnese by the force of its hoplites. Sparta had thrown itself into the sea and founded Taranto in 707 on the Italian peninsula. Athens, for its part, achieved supremacy over Attica by exclusively political procedures. Still, it had not become the most important city in Greece, but it had been a pioneer in a process that, little by little, would affect most of the Greek polis. The decline of the monarchy. And back to Rome. The 4th king of Rome, Anco Marcius, would have inherited from his grandfather Numa Pompilius, the devout character, although not pacifist. It represents, to a certain extent, a balance between the virtues of its predecessors. It expanded the Roman domains, was concerned with political and religious institutions, and built the first major urban works in the city, such as the extension of the walls, the first bridge on the Tiber, and the port of Ostia, which would have a great importance for the history of the city. The diplomacy exercised by Anco allowed the peaceful union of several smaller villages in alliance with Rome. Thanks to this method, he got control of the Latins. From there came the new settlers that Anco brought to the city, and who contributed to the growth that Rome was already experiencing. He housed the new settlers on Mount Aventine, which became the 5th hill in Rome. These consolidated the plebeian class of Rome, which would not have the same rights or obligations as the original inhabitants, the patricians. This group of the population was not allowed to send representatives to the Senate or hold public office. Anco Marcius stood out for instituting the concept of just war, that is, the conditions that had to be met to declare war with the approval of the gods. After 24 years of reign, he died a natural death, like his grandfather before him, being remembered as one of the great pontiffs of Rome. He was the last of the Latin Sabine kings of Rome. Tarquinius Priscus was the fifth king of Rome, and the first of Etruscan origin, presumably of Corinthian descent, ruling Rome from 617 to 579 before the current era. After emigrating to Rome, he had obtained the favor of Anco, who adopted him as his son. Rome prospered under his rule, benefiting from the advanced Etruscan culture. Upon ascending the throne, he waged several victorious wars against the Sabines and Etruscans, thus doubling the size of Rome and obtaining great treasures for the city. One of his first reforms was to add 100 new members to the Senate, coming from the conquered Etruscan tribes, bringing the number of senators to a total of 300. He also expanded the army, doubling the number of troops, up to 6,000 infantry and 600 horsemen. He used the great spoils obtained in his military campaigns to build great monuments in Rome. Among these works, the great sewage system of the city stands out, the Cloaca Maxima, whose purpose was to drain the waters of a small stream of the Tiber, which used to stagnate in the valleys located between the hills of Rome. In the place of the old marshes, Tarquinius began the construction of the Roman Forum. Another of the king's innovations was the creation of the Roman games. The most famous of his construction projects was the Circus Maximus, a large stadium that housed horse races, and which is, to date, the largest of all those erected in the world. Tarquinius continued the Circus Maximus with the construction of a temple fortress on the Capitol Hill, consecrated to the god Jupiter, where the Romans could take refuge in the worst moments of their history. All these constructions were carried out under the direction of Etruscan engineers and artists, who had learned much of their trade from the Greeks. Tarquinius obtained military victories against other Latin cities. Tarquinius' policy of conquest was completed with the submission to Rome of several communities settled in ancient Latium. Thus, he took possession of the arms of Cornicle, Faculia, Cameria, Crustamario, Nomento, Amariola, and Medulia. This step was very important since it allowed them to increase the number of Roman citizens, incorporate new lands into the city, and, ultimately, make Rome the political and administrative center of a large territory, by virtue of which Rome was placed at the similar to that of other great Etruscan cities. Tarquinius was assassinated after 38 years of reign by the sons of his predecessor, Ancus Marcius, even before the Temple of Jupiter was finished. After the death of Tarquinius Priscus, his son-in-law, Servius Tullius, succeeded him on the throne, being the second king of Etruscan origin. He would reign from the 579 to the 535. Servius Tullius, having curried favor with Tarquinius and his wife, Tanaquil, married Gagania, the king's daughter. When Tarquinius was executed by 2 assassins, hired by the sons of Anco Marcius, who were trying to inherit the throne that had belonged to their father, Tanaquil ordered the announcement of the king's death to be delayed. And she told the people of Rome that while he was restored, the king had chosen Servius Tullius to rule on his behalf. Meanwhile, the Marcius were banished. Then, after a few days, the official announcement of the death of the king was made. The accession to the throne of Servius Tullius was carried out irregularly, without respecting the interregnum, without the vote of the people, and without the ratification of the Senate. He would have been the first to reign without submitting to the popular vote. Like his father-in-law before him, Servius waged several victorious wars against the Etruscans. He used the booty obtained in his campaigns to erect the first walls, which would surround the 7 Roman hills on the Pomerium, the so-called Servian walls. The old fortifications of the city would reach, in the period of the Republic, a length of 11 kilometers and 427 hectares. He achieved renown for developing a new constitution for the Romans, with greater attention to the citizen classes. He instituted the first census in history, dividing the people of Rome into 5 economic classes, also creating the centuriate assembly. He also used the census to divide the city into 4 urban tribes, based on their spatial location within the city, establishing the tribal assembly. Servius' reforms represented a great change in Roman life. The right to vote was established based on economic wealth, for which much of the political power was reserved for the Roman elites. However, over time, Servius gradually favored the most disadvantaged classes, in order to obtain greater support among the commoners, for which his legislation can be defined as unsatisfactory for the patrician class. Servius also made changes to the organization of the Roman army. His reign was also notable for the construction of the Temple of Diana on the Aventine Hill. Servius Tullius' long reign of 44 years ended with his assassination in a conspiracy hatched by his own daughter Tullia and Lucius Tarquinius, his successor to the throne. Lucius, the son of Tarquinius Priscus, appeared in the Forum, accompanied by armed men, and summoned the senators to denounce Servius as an illegitimate king. Then, according to Titus Livius' version, Tarquinius murdered the king, pushing him down the stairs into the Forum. Servius Tullius is remembered as one of the most admired kings of Rome, to the point of being considered almost as a second founder and the true creator of the concept of Roman citizenship. After he assassinated Servius Tullius, the legendary Lucius Tarquinius Superb would become the 7th and last king of Rome. He would reign from the 535 to the 509. He was the son of Tarquinius Priscus and son-in-law of Servius Tullius. Lucius Tarquinius was also of Etruscan origin. The new king quickly dismissed all the dissenting senators and set himself up as dictator of Rome, modeling his reign on the Greek tyrants of the time. It was during his reign that the Etruscans reached the height of their power. Tarquinius used violence, murder, and terror to maintain control over Rome, as no previous king had used them, even repealing many constitutional reforms that his predecessors had established. Ancient sources present the reign of Tarquinius Superb as a period of expansion in which Rome consolidated its hegemony over Latium. In the early years of Lucius Tarquinius' reign, the king embarked on an ambitious campaign of expansion, waging war against the Etruscans, Latins, and Volscians. He firmly established Rome at the head of the Latin League, now a more military-oriented association, and conquered several Latin cities. He is credited with the conquest of Paemetia and Tusculum. In addition, he established colonies in Signia and Circio. His conquests served to finance the completion of the Capitoline Jupiter Temple, begun by his father Priscus. Tarquinius abolished and destroyed all the Sabine sanctuaries and altars of the Tarpeian Rock, thus infuriating the Roman people. The turning point of his tyrannical reign came when he allowed the rape of Lucretia, a Roman patrician, by her own son, Sextus. A relative of Lucretia and nephew of the king, Lucius Brutus, summoned the Senate, which decided the expulsion of Tarquinius in the year 510 before our era. Tarquinius then fled to the city of Tusculum and later to Cumas. The expulsion of Lucius Tarquinius in 509, after a 25-year reign, marked the end of the Etruscan influence, both in Rome and in Lazio, and the establishment of a republican constitution. The Senate decided to abolish the monarchy, turning Rome into a republic. Lucius Brutus and Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus became the first consuls of Rome's new government, the Republic. But Lucius Tarquinius continued with his attempts to return to power. From his exile, he then turned to the Etruscan king of Clusio, Lars Porsena, to end the early Roman Republic. And Porsena agreed to help him. When news of Lars Porsena's impending attack reached Rome, the Senate was greatly alarmed, due to Clusio's power and Lars Porsena's reputation. Furthermore, they worried that the plebs, overcome by their fears, would admit Tarquinius to the city and accept peace, even if it meant slavery. Rome might have fallen at Lars Porsena's first assault, had it not been for a man named Horatius Coccles. The Clusians had attempted to enter the city by force, across the Sublician Bridge. The Romans guarding the bridge fled in terror, except for Horatius Coccles, who along with 2 other warriors, advanced to the head of the bridge to block the enemy's path. As a consequence of Horatius Coccles' bravery, Lars Porsena's first assault on Rome was thwarted. Lars Porsena then changed his strategy and ordered his men to prepare for a siege. As the siege continued, a young nobleman named Gaius Mucius Scaevola appeared before the Senate and volunteered to infiltrate the Clusians' camp with the goal of assassinating Lars Porsena. The Senate gave its approval. Gaius Mucius, disguised, entered the Clusian camp. But, not knowing Porsena in person, and fearing that if he did not hurry he might be discovered, he was wrong and killed the wrong man. Arrested and brought before the king, far from being intimidated, Mucius presented himself as a Roman citizen, ready to kill Lars Porsena. Gaius Mucius then revealed that there were 300 young Romans who were willing to try their luck, assassinating Lars Porsena, with him being the first of the 300. This ruse worked, as Lars Porsena was so distraught that he decided to make peace with the Romans. Thus, Gaius Mucius saved Rome. After other failed attempts to return to power in Rome, Lucius Tarquinius obtained asylum from the tyrant Aristodemus of Cumae, where he died in 495 before the current era. Rome, under the new system of government, the Roman Republic, would achieve the conquest of almost the entire Mediterranean world, and would last for almost 500 years, until the ascension of Julius Caesar and Caesar Augustus. First, it would impose itself as the dominant power in the Italian peninsula. It would then project its power outside of Italy, becoming the greatest power in the Mediterranean. It would expand its dominions over the Greek polis and conquer the coasts of the Middle East. Later, Rome would experience great political changes, which would shake the Republic with 3 major civil wars. These wars would end up destroying the Republic and leading to a new stage in the history of Rome, the Roman Empire. But what happened during the period of the Republic, as well as the stage of the Roman Empire, will be the topics that we will explore during the upcoming episodes of our Origin series. Thank you, friends, for coming this far. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, please activate the notifications bell, and leave us a like so that our work can reach many more people.